And so what AI allows us to do is kind of bridge the gap between computers and humans and how they communicate and deal with one another. And that is the layer that we're adding here. There's still a lot of human interpretation that has to happen, even in an unmanned application. So this is not removing the need for qualified mariners. I think there's more of a need than that, realistically, than there ever has been.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Fortunato, your host of the AI Captain's Log. Welcome back. If you've ever stared at a radar screen in a summer squall and thought, I know there is a tanker on my port side, where did it go? Then this episode's for you. We're talking about the end of ambiguous blips. My guest today is Andrew Rain, Senior Sales Director from Tocaro Blue, a company that has spent years of training on millions of radar frames to help mariners navigate what they call Proteus and what I call a newfound sense of confidence and understanding of my radar data. Andrew's passion for situational awareness started long before he began building products on the water. He began his boating life very early in Alabama, but he actually started his career in professional sports car racing, using his expertise in high-performance driving and coaching at places like Porsche Track Experience and Barber Motorsports Park. That motorsports career led him to start Apex Pro Business, which eventually spawned Moxie IoT, which is the Internet of Things, a custom electronics product company focused on sensor data integration. Tocaro Blue, which is where he works now, acquired Moxie in September 2023 to enhance their Proteus Core AI-based radar processing product. Andrew is passionate about situational awareness and the limitations of sensors on boats and believes boater education will always be better than buying a fancier gadget. Well, I don't know about that, Andrew, but we'll get there. That said, we know that radar and cameras on boats can be greatly improved to keep people safe on the water, and Andrew's work is already making a huge impact in this area. Andrew has been boating on Lake Martin, Alabama, his whole life, and is an Auburn University alumni. Welcome aboard to the show, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth.
Absolutely.
What an intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're the star today.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk about all things, marine tech and AI and where the industry's going.
Yeah. Well, I have to fully admit something to you guys. And I think I've talked to Brianna, your coworker, about this, is that you guys were my inspirations to starting this podcast. So I'm really excited to have you on here. I looked at the Proteus Core product, and I currently have an older boat, and unfortunately I couldn't get it on board my boat to even do testing. I was trying to be a beta tester for you guys. This is probably back in 2023, but I was trying to be a beta tester, but my Simrad system is too old. So you have to stop backward compatibility at some point. I get it. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys and seeing a little bit more about what you have or what's going on, especially with this new stuff that you're doing. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting hint at our history. We launched this Proteus product as a navigational solution, just like enhanced navigation and awareness application for recreational boaters. And that did come with a lot of caveats, because it turns out that there's a lot of disparity in marine electronics in terms of compatibility across manufacturers, across certainly when products were released, like you're saying, plotters, chart plotters, and radar in particular. That's a big challenge that's facing innovators in this space, is the electronics manufacturers. They're the ones who sell the equipment that you have on your boat. There's only, 4, maybe 5 of them. And you kind of have to play in their ecosystem in order to bring new products to the market. And that was a challenge for us.
Yeah, I can only imagine when it comes to updating some of these electronics, they'll wait to the last, until it is literally dead. It doesn't work anymore. But anyway, what I want to talk to you today really is about your products that you have out there that are really phenomenal in what they're doing and how they're changing the radar screen that we think about when we see today. So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the impetus for changing the way radar display works. Radar has been around for a really, really long time. I just recorded not promoting it, but I just recorded a small episode about 12 minutes long about the history of radar, because I think it's very fascinating as a, kind of complementary to what we're going to talk about today. But radar technology really didn't change a lot since World War II. I mean, we have Doppler, we have a few things that changed, but when you really started looking at it, what was that impetus that you said, this can be better?
I think it's probably very similar to what most boaters who have a radar have experienced, which is just, turning the radar on to transmit, not really looking at any settings, and just being overwhelmed by the display. like a lot of us have experienced, you'll get a lot of returns. A lot of times the gain won't be set correctly, or the range will be set to, whatever the kind of native settings are. A big issue that we found was like calibrating the radar and your compass, because they're two very different systems. They're not always overlaid. So if you have a chart display under the radar display, those two things can be misaligned really easily. And that'll even swing, like when your compass swings a little bit when you turn the boat or when you go by something metallic nearby, it'll move that radar overlay. And so there's all sorts of little things where we just started thinking about it from a technology perspective. Our head of R&D here at Tocaro Blue, Austin Gurley, he and I worked together on Apex Pro, which is a machine learning based algorithm that we used in an automotive perspective. So a product for high performance driving, helping you understand where the limit of the car is. So like, when is my car about to slide or not? And so he had done a lot of work with sensors. So accelerometers, things like that. And so radar really was not that far out of the realm in terms of sensor technology. And he has a very good foundational physics understanding. And so he just started looking at it and being like, how do I know if there's something I need to avoid here? Like a wave that's a pretty substantial wave can look just like a boat at times in a radar. And so we really just tried to understand how we could apply technology to that to make it better, to make the user experience simpler.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Thinking about those, one of the things that does make me nervous, not just about, being out there and sort of on the ocean, because that's one of the things that we're looking to do is get more ocean time with our new boat. And one of the things that makes me really nervous is when you hear about these rogue waves, because when you get, a weather prediction and it says you're going to have 5 to 8 foot swells, that doesn't mean they're always going to be 5 to 8 foot. You can have a rogue wave that actually is going to be at the top of that range and can be as big as 10 feet or 12 feet. And just being on the bay, one time I was out there and it was really calm, but I saw this wave coming towards me. I was like, what the heck? Where did that come from? And I literally was seeing it come right towards me. And I told my husband, I was like, batten down the hatches, honey. I don't know what thing this is going to do or how it's going to hit us, but this thing is a coming. And it was coming across the bay and there was no way for us to avoid it. It could have been from a naval cutter doing exercises. Some of those things produces really big waves. I've had some really big waves out on the bay from that. But having a radar system that could actually tell you that would be phenomenal, really.
Yeah,
so
we're on the path to do that for sure.
Yeah, so you just unveiled, and we'll talk a little bit about this. We're going to jump back and forth between these two technologies because they really go hand in glove. But you just unveiled Apollo Core, which is really something you guys just rolled out this month. So we'll go into a little bit more detail. But can you talk a little bit about what that journey was from your current product, the Proteus Core, to getting to Apollo Core? Because you just rolled that out a couple years ago. And, in terms of the radar technology, I know technology changes really fast nowadays, but in terms of what you guys are doing in radar technology, it's been such a slow progression and you're already making it better. So what was that when you said, okay, well, we've gotten this far, now what? So what was that progression?
Yeah, that's, I think it mostly comes as a consequence of our success and traction with our radar solution, Proteus Core. So we realized that this problem that we stumbled into with radar, hey, this user display doesn't make sense to the average boater. That problem transpired into, not only does it not make sense for the average boater, but for people who are trying to control boats autonomously, which is a more common thing now than it has been. A lot, in large part due to the Ukraine and Russia conflict, where the Ukrainians have been very successful with remotely controlled unmanned vessels. And so the holy grail is autonomous boat operation, a small boat or a medium-sized boat that can go anywhere and perform missions without a human on board. Now that doesn't solve all missions, or all situations, but it can certainly remove a human from danger. You can do things with autonomous boats that, unlocks all sorts of opportunity, right? And even cost savings opportunities. But we learned that the radar information is not useful for autonomy yet. And so what Proteus Core became was less of a human interaction, display kind of element and more of an autonomous control tool. So we adapted our technology for that use case. That industry really uptook Proteus Core and started using it. And with the rapid growth and scale that we're seeing in the defense aspect of that industry, that really gave us this purview into, hey, marine cameras aren't really solved either. I think, especially with my background being automotive, I trained people on, Porsche and Mercedes-Benz products that had, highly capable semi-autonomous features 10 years ago. They had the same lane keep assist and blind spot detection and automatic collision, automatic braking. Those things existed in like 2016 and they were pretty decent. They weren't great. They're much better now. So I think a lot of us and a lot of people in the marine industry are being brought in from automotive to kind of bring that knowledge base and apply it. But I think that the application on the water itself is so fundamentally different. You have to come at it from a different headspace to solve it because the automotive industry benefits from scale. When Tesla decides they want to make their cars autonomous, they have hundreds of thousands of, they have this big, everybody needs a car, right? Almost like most of the developed world needs a car. So there's a huge target market for cars to be sold to. And boats have just there's many less boats are sold in a year. And also it's not like there's 10 or 15 boat builders that sell boats like there are automotive manufacturers. There's really like 15 automotive manufacturers pretty much that build cars at scale. There's some bespoke, small quantity stuff. But when you look at boats, there's like 40,000 boat builders in the world.
Yeah.
So it just is and those people, some boat builders build a boat a year. Some boat builders build 100 boats a year. But there's not any volume near the scale that we see in the automotive industry. So that's one of the big drivers where it's a different market opportunity. It's not on the boat builder to develop autonomy. It's on a vendor like us. It's on a third-party supplier. That's how the marine industry functions more so than automotive. And so we saw that opportunity of like, hey, this is Proteus Core is an opportunity to get in on the ground floor for autonomous boating technologies. And then we also saw that not only do people need a solution for radar, but the cameras that are mounted on many, many boats and on almost all of the unmanned boats are these usually a FLIR or similar brand camera that's a point tilt zoom camera, so it moves and articulates. That camera needs to be used to autonomously detect objects and feed that into a decision-making software engine. And that capability doesn't exist. So that's what Apollo Core solves.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And it's really interesting because I literally just talked to somebody. I had my first autonomous vehicle driving experience in DC the other day with a Tesla. And I was talking to one of the people that he was kind of queuing me up. He'd been there for 14 years. So he sort of saw the progression happening. And one of the things we were talking about was the fact that in vehicles like Tesla, you have millions of hours of time, recorded time on the cameras to train the AI systems. With marine, you don't have that yet at all. So, will we get to that in the future? One of those things that with companies like you that are doing this, we have the potential to get there, but we don't have the quantity yet to record it, to train the system the way that you've done with Proteus, the Proteus Core, the training you've done. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but that's really the software training that has to go in, sort of the brains of the system that has to be done.
The data collection.
Before you can get to that truly autonomous vessel, kind of be able to make decisions or be able to have enough information to, adjust course, to know what's in front of you, to alert you.
Sure.
I think it really goes into kind of like the classification. We're talking about the brains of the system is that when Proteus sees a target and classifies it, and it's been taught what is land, what's a buoy, maybe what is a wake, what is, I don't know if you get as fancy as what's a shrimp boat. It's a container ship. I don't know if you get that fancy, but
Yeah, not with the radar. That's really tough. But we do distinguish between boats and buoys. And then we can also, with some radars, we can distinguish between like a small boat and a large boat. And then over time, eventually with enough data, even with radar, we can likely start to do things like sailboat under sail because it might have some distinct movement differences than a sailboat under power, as an example.
Yeah, for sure.
But we couldn't, it would be impossible to tell a sailboat under power. That would just look like a power boat. But if a sailboat's tacking, as an example, or if you have information about wind direction and what the boat's doing, you can make some intelligent decisions based on. But that requires a lot of data, which kind of goes back to your previous point.
Yeah. So you not only have to deal with the training of the system. It's interesting because, we talk about AI a lot, but you guys started this really back when we're talking about machine learning. We're talking about how do you train these systems? You're really talking about, data that you've actually layered on intelligence too. So in other words, it's the data that's coming out of the radar system and you've layered on that intelligence and teaching the system what that object is. So I don't know if you want to get that level of detail into it, but I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing because people don't really understand always that you have to it doesn't just like, you can't just open up a box and look at it. And I don't even know where you start with your model. Like, where do you start with your AI model? Like, where do you start? Or has it always been homegrown?
Yeah. So for radar, it's always been entirely bespoke. And that's mostly because what exists in terms of AI infrastructure for sensors is machine vision for optics. That's how most automotive applications and most aerial drones are doing object detection and classification. They're using cameras. And so that's the lens, so to speak, that you can kind of approach it through. We came into sensors from a different angle. We didn't really have optics experience. Like I mentioned before with racing, we came through it from a IMU and a gyro, accelerometer, like more of a inertial sensor background where we were used to processing these really noisy sensors and doing things like using Kalman filters and other machine learning kind of, I would say more simplistic machine learning elements to refine the data and to distill the best information from it. And that kind of spawned into a much more sophisticated use of that type of technology as we started to apply it to radar. But it's very, very different than looking at it from how most people, I think, approach it, which is I can classify stuff with a camera. Can I do that with radar? If you think about it from that perspective, it never works because radar data is, there's way less information in it than a camera image. And so we had to look at it from a fundamentally different perspective. And we just did naturally. I think that's what led to our success. But machine learning is a more precise way to talk about what we do. It is a form of AI, but it's not AI in that it doesn't make general decisions, right? It makes very specific decisions. And so we're tasking our machine learning models with here's an image from a radar frame. Is that a boat, a buoy, wake, or land? What do you think based on the information you've been given? And it makes a determination. And every time that the radar frame comes in, every once a second roughly, it makes a new determination on what that is. Then we average that number out. And over a course of time, we say that this object is this classification or this percentage, this classification. And so that's kind of how the actual machine learning works. We can bring in other data sources. So when there's AIS available, we can associate AIS with radar detections, which we have a different kind of software module that reconciles here's an AIS boat's location and a radar location, make sure those are the same. Because that's actually like we take it for granted a little bit, but that's actually very hard to do. Same thing with charts. There's a buoy here, there's a radar blob here. They're in two different locations. How do I know they're the same thing? We also solve that problem as well. So we use those data sources, but I would say that our radar proficiency is really what's allowed us to, that's really what's grown. And that's an entirely bespoke home built. I mean, we have an R&D team that's building models, like architecting our own machine learning models.
Yes. So you're not outsourcing it to a foreign country and having them click, click, click.
No, we do our own data labeling. So and what's interesting is our background as a recreational boating company that allowed us to sell hardware devices to early adopters, like yourself when you first interacted with our solution.
Right.
Folks that did have compatible equipment, they were able to buy a system and we asked for their permission to have their trip data. And we don't really care about where they went or what they were doing. We just care about how many boats were in a radar sweep, right? Or what types of interesting geographic locations were they in where the radar data looks different. And we absorbed all that data and we built a pipeline for training that data. And what that looks like for someone who's not as like software or AI familiar, maybe as we are, is like we harvest a bunch of training data and then we have a human look at those radar frames. And every frame, a human is tagging a return as an object classification, saying, hey, this is that object. And when you're a human and you have the ability to like replay the radar frame over time, it's very easy to tell when you look at it it's not easy to tell initially, right? It's very difficult. But once you look at it for thousands of hours, typically, you can very easily tell what is a boat and what isn't in a radar frame, especially when the data comes with other sources of information. Like, hey, we had an observer on the boat. Here's what they reported that they saw. Or here's a camera stream that gives you another information. Or here's all the AIS for that area on this, for this timestamp. And so we actually have a human that we employ that works either in our office here in Alabama or in Pensacola, Florida. And they physically label the data with a custom tool that we built specifically for labeling radar data. So it's a very intensive process.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine. And do you find, just gonna maybe one more question in this area, because it's a little deep. Do you find that you've been able to increase your efficiency in that area of your machine learning. So in other words, the more you train, the faster you can train. Have you found that that's the case for you all, or is it really typically going to always be a more intense training of the tool?
No, there's definitely some learnings that have come through the early part of the process. We've grown the team as a big part of the scale, so we now have a dedicated like expert data labeler, and she handles all of the data ingestion. Also, like what data should we label? So there's a whole science not only to like can we actually label every data point that we have. That's very different than what data should we be labeling. And so then we also do things like we have multiple models, multiple AI models that I'll just call it AI for the purpose of the conversation, but it's semi-supervised machine learning is the technique that we're really talking about. But it's deciding like what do our customers really need from us? What problem are we really solving with this? And we need to hone in on things like geography, on things like there's all like bad weather. We need bad weather data, right? And so it's deciding what radar frames do we label, which ones do we not? What's not a very good representative, data set, right? And when you only have limited resources, you have to make those decisions. You can't just label everything all the time because we get a lot of data back, which is great. We have like 80 different boats with our system on it we can pull data from. So it's a very big corpus of data.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's always, with boating, it's conditions change. Everything is always changing. And so that's the other part. And so let's talk about Apollo Core, because I feel like this is really the next level of enhanced data and, also data labeling too, and how you integrate not just the AIS data with the charts and the radar data like you're talking about, but then that next layer of data, which is camera data, is actually visual data. I don't know what you call it necessarily on your end, but
yeah. We call it EOIR, so electro-optical and infrared.
Makes
camera,
sense.
Basically. But
yeah,
daytime or nighttime. You could also look at it. Yeah, EO is daytime and IR is nighttime.
Yeah. So but I'm thinking about from the mariner standpoint, what is that going to give me in terms of that next level of awareness? What is that going to do? Where is that taking me? Because a lot of mariners, we don't even have what you have now on our boats, and you're even getting better.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of a market approach that's good to kind of preface that conversation with too. And it's like we originally built a navigation application for recreational boaters, but we quickly realized that the appetite for the technology we're building was in the defense sector. We still have very strong commercial and recreational relationships, but our approach now is let's harden this capability with whoever has the highest willingness to pay, which is going to be defense, right? They need new technologies, and new technology is expensive. So you can't realistically, unless you want to raise a ton of money, right, and put yourself at huge risk, you can't be too idealistic about like, oh yeah, we're just going to bring this new product to market, everyone's going to adopt it. That's not how markets work, right? So what we're doing is we're hardening a capability using this unmanned vessel segment that in reality, the hope is for this technology to make everyone that's on a boat safer. And I don't think the future is that we all want recreational boats that drive themselves, right? Like most of the time we want to be on the boat because we're in control. And that's a big part of it. But automatic alerting that's highly accurate, anything that can prevent, all of us, especially those of us who've spent our lives on the water, and me on freshwater, you on saltwater, like everyone, a lot of people have done that for most of their lives. We all have those moments where we see people who are newer that aren't, following the rules of the road. They're making simple mistakes. They don't understand the fundamentals. We all get, distracted, and, especially when you're on like a long, passing or crossing somewhere where you have to be away from the helm for a while, or there's a million situations where high quality object detection and collision avoidance information could be very helpful. So the ultimate goal is, unlike in the automotive space, again, like Tesla only uses cameras to detect objects around the car. They're very focused on that. Elon's been like very aggressive that we want to do that. And it's for a commercial reason. They're the affordable sensors. And in an automotive application, you can get enough data with just cameras, with how many thousand, like you mentioned, they have hundreds of thousands of cars they can pull data off of. So we're talking about an enormous amount of data. We're never going to have that luxury in boating. That scale just doesn't exist. And so we have always thought about it from a sensor fusion standpoint. We have to have multiple types of sensors on the boat to get a complete picture of what's around us. Because as we all know, the radar doesn't reflect off of everything. Not everything is radar reflective, right? Cameras don't see everything, right? Sometimes, like very often when we're on our test boat now, you can look out with your own eyes, and at hundreds of yards, you can go, oh, there's a little tiny, marker over there, or a little, crab pot or something that's just sitting on the surface. And in the camera, it's not even a pixel, right? So it's a hard barometer when you're comparing sensors to your own biological eyes, because your eyes have stereo vision. You have two eyes. They're not, the same location. So you can tell how far away things are. So we've always, the Apollo Core is our effort to say, hey, we know that to do intelligent automation of vessels on the water to make boaters safer, we have to combine, optical sensors and radar-based sensors, and those have to kind of speak the same language. And currently they do not, because they could not be more different. Yeah. And so Apollo Core is our first product that has fusion, where we can really say this object we see with the camera is the same object we see with the radar, and not make them two different objects. And that's a huge innovation for this industry. And I think it's one of the foundational steps that allows for safer boating for everybody. Because ultimately, I think what this looks like, our technology applied to the recreational space, is, I've set my autopilot on course hold, or I'm following waypoints. Another boat comes in front of me that was unexpected, or maybe isn't following the rules to the road. Maybe all that my boat has to do is slow down 3 miles an hour, and now I pass safely behind it. We want your autopilot system to be able to do that. Right now, it doesn't have the information to do that.
No.
And if that's all the change that has to happen, that's great. There's other situations more akin to emergency braking in the car, right? Where, particularly like a jet ski or a personal watercraft or something does something really erratic, and we want to be able to respond to that too. But there's so many situations where it's just like, hey, if you're on autopilot, like, let's make sure that the captain knows if you're about to hit something, right? That's what we want to do. That's the capability we can unlock.
Well, if you think about it though, and one of the things that I've heard from other people, and I have limited time in the ocean, a lot of people are out there all the time, and there is debris. There's literally the containers that fall off of ships. And I just was talking to somebody who just did a passage, and he said his captain was most worried about containers because you really can't see them at night. And you can see them sometimes on the radar, but it's like an iceberg out there in the jet stream or whatever. It's out there, and you might see the top of it, but you're not going to necessarily know that's a container until you get closer. And if it's night and then you're on autopilot, because a lot of times when you're doing your night watch, you're on autopilot. You're just going and you're really watching. I have my eyes glued to, when I was doing that and doing night watch, I had my eyes glued to my radar. That was like my most important instrument out there. But, I don't know that I would have seen a container. And luckily I didn't think about that and didn't even consider that, because then I would have been completely freaked out and constantly adjusting my range.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, those are the risks that, we're seeing just today. And it makes some of this, people that want to do just cruising as a couple, they want to do ocean passages, they want to do, and this is, a small niche group, but, even when you think about things like pirating and you're going slow enough that you can be caught up with, and just knowing what maybe is we're talking about threats, that's a totally different topic, but, not sort of having really good awareness around you is basically what we're trying to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing that I want boaters to take away from this, folks who own a boat or on the water regularly, I think we need to expect more. The sensors that you have on your boat are very capable. They're very powerful. We need to start expecting more from them, because when we get in a brand new car, the experience could not be more different than driving a boat. And I'm a big believer in teaching the fundamentals. So I don't think that you should be taught to, when you're driving a car, that's my professional background, right? I don't think you should be taught like everything's going to be done for you by the car. I think you need to understand how the car operates. But part of the education here is that we can close the gap to what someone would expect getting on a new boat. And I think it opens the door for more people to get on the water. If boating is inherently a little safer, because I do think there's a lot of people. I was talking to a couple in Wilmington last week. I was there for an interview on another podcast, funny enough, Wilmington, North Carolina. And I had a couple tell me that they had a dinghy and the 24-foot center console. And they said that they only take the 24-foot center console out when they have friends around or they have a big crowd or something. Like it's just a pain getting in and out of the dock. That makes us kind of nervous. They were telling me, and the whole time I'm like, man, a 24-foot boat, that's really, that's pretty simple to get around, right? But there's so many people out there that, have 30, 40, 50, 60-foot boats that feel a similar level of anxiety. And I think that technology needs to help in those situations. Like, it needs to reduce the risk in edge cases. I'm in bad weather. I'm out at night unintentionally, right? Like, I got caught, out in a storm and I ended up having to come back in at night. There's all these things. And I think aviation has done a really good job of like solving for those things. And there's a very structured and rigorous training process. And driving, don't even get me started on driver training. But boating, I think there's a shocking limit. There's not a lot of training that's required. And I think that because of that, we need these sensors to display in a way that makes sense to us as humans. And I think automotive is starting to get there. It's starting to become intuitive to use modern technologies in these cars. And it is keeping people safer. Backup cameras keep people safe. It keeps children from being run over. That's very obvious in the data. It's very objective. And I think we need similar capabilities in cars so that we can continue to attract new people to get into boating, keep them on the water, have them enjoy their boat for longer. And that grows the whole industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thinking about the rise in the boating clubs, and and we may even get to a point where we're doing fractional ownership. I mean, of boats. Boats are expensive. New boats are especially expensive, and I don't think the industry has really approached that, but we talk about fractional ownership. Not every person may have the same capabilities if you're doing a fractional ownership of a boat or a vessel. And you also get charter boats or those kind of avenues where this is not a person who's familiar with that vessel. So I do think that there's a lot that can be done and enhanced to make that more available to a broader cross section of people. Because like you said, the boating safety training or the boating safety requirements are limited, and only if you're born after like 1973 is it required. And there's a lot of boaters who are out there who are born before 1973. I mean, and there are a lot of younger boaters out there. I love seeing the younger boaters out there because the licensing and the boating age is sometimes less than, and depending on the area you're in, than for a car. So sometimes these kids are out there just, with their buddies boating around in the summer, just spend the summer fishing. We're in a very, very heavy boating area at this area that I'm in. So I do think it adds to the availability and accessibility, which I think will be a little bit of our future in boating because of the boating clubs and the boating charters and the fractional ownership that may come this way. So do we want to see it in action? Are you going to be doing a demo for
Sure.
us?
I can do a real quick demo. Just give me 1 second to get everything kind of populated here. And I think you kind of said something that, again, there's a lot of analogs here to the automotive industry, which is where I kind of cut my teeth in my first kind of like professional, realm. I learned how to teach people how to drive fast cars, which is the greatest initial job you could ask for. It's pretty cool. But we've seen this massive increase in horsepower and at the average vehicle that anyone can go and buy. And we've seen the same thing happen on boats with the outboard engines becoming so prominent and common, that what you see is folks that'll buy a boat with 1,200 horsepower that can go 60 knots. That's not uncommon for a new center console, especially in kind of the Florida area. And that's extremely dangerous just in of itself. And there's not any collision avoidance technology on those boats. They have a radar in most cases. Sometimes they have a camera, but those are completely reliant on the user and the owner to configure. And typically those systems get configured by, the electronic technician. They get configured, by the marina, whoever is dealing with that boat, right, configures that for the first time. But for the most part, those are never, configured or updated or made sure that they're running the most, the newest software, or, they're not calibrated with the compass correctly. There's all these things that go wrong that we see over and over again. And we need to create some durability against that in the industry to keep people safe on the water. Otherwise, we're going to continue seeing a higher rate of accidents.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, there's just, there is a few boats that could go really, really fast when growing up. And, we knew them. They were, Donzies, the Scarabs, those kind of boats, but it wasn't every boat that's out there. And now you see these boats cruising by, they've got quads on the back, and you're like, what the heck are you doing?
Right.
Like, where are you, a drug runner? Like, what are you doing? Why do you need all that power? Because I'm a trawler, we don't go fast.
It's so common. And I think that's something that, as I kind of walk through this demo, I'll speak to that a little bit. Our test boats are both small and pretty quick. Right. We test at 40 knots pretty regularly because we see that in the recreational market, that's a big application for collision avoidance tech. I want to get where I'm going faster. Right. Modern boats can do that. You burn a lot of fuel doing that. So a lot of people do it, a few times, and then they realize what's going on and how much that affects their wallet. But we do need to be able to get places quickly if we get stuck in a storm or there's certain requirements. So we need the technology to work. And we need the technology to work well when the boat's rolling and pitching and the bow's up in the air and we're facing down in the trough of a wave. And there's so many requirements for technology in the marine space that are outside of the realm of what we'd ever see in the automotive space. Cars have to work in the rain, right? Boats are basically in the rain all the time, but it's worse. It's sea spray and salt water. So what we're showing here on the screen is the Proteus Core software. This is our radar solution. And I don't have Apollo core where I can show it. But what we're seeing here is just a raw radar display. And this is what you would typically see on a boat when you buy your radar. Now, this is a fairly well-tuned radar. You'll still see that there's some kind of radial projections coming off the shoreline here. But for the most part, this is a decently well-tuned radar. And if I watch long enough, I'll be able to see some moving targets here. Those are probably boats. I can see some static targets. I don't know what those are. It could be a stationary boat. It could be substantial debris. It could be a buoy. But we don't know. And that's what's so difficult about using radar. So our software tunes the radar. It sets the gain and the range settings to be appropriate for the environment, which means a lot of different things. But in this case, it's accommodating for our speed, the speed of our vessel, and the proximity we are to land. So if there's a lot of land in the radar image, we know that there's land there because we have a very well updated charting system that we maintain. And we can correlate radar with land automatically so that we can eliminate that from the consideration set, because the chart, we want to lean on the charts if we can. If the radar is more up to date than the chart, then we'll use that information. But now I'm going to toggle on a tracker icon so we can start to see Proteus Core working. So now you can see little boat icons on these objects with target trails. You can see chart icons, chart-like objects. So I can see that this is a marker that's actually charted. So now you can see the fusion that's happening. We know that this marker I've clicked on here is the Bayou Chico Day Beacon. It's a red triangle. And when I click on that, the radar and the chart object are the same. Mm-hmm. Now I can start changing my screen here and really show you the AI kind of working in the background. So this pink display is our raw radar. This is what you would see on your MFD. Now I'm going to change it so that what you see is what we call course labels. So this starts to show you how Proteus Core actually works. I'm going to leave the overlay on. I was going to turn off the tracker icons. Okay, so now you can start to see objects in the radar frame being colored by what we think they are. We call this step classification. So machine vision classification is when you do this with cameras. Like a Tesla knows the difference between a car and a human. Those are two very important things. On the water, the biggest, most important distinction is a boat and a buoy, right? Because those are kind of the two most prominent objects that we see, right? And any moving object on the water can kind of be considered a boat, and any stationary object can kind of be considered a buoy. And so that's the most important classification, because how any mariner or autonomous system is going to react is going to be different based on those distinctions. So you can see here that purple objects are markers or buoys, and blue objects are boats. So those are the two kind of objects on the water. And then you'll see additionally on the right side of the screen here, the black color is wake or noise. And those are the same classification. That just means a noise, like a reflection from the wake or a reflection off a building or any sort of radar, radio wave frequency reflection. What's important is that machine learning in particular is way better than we are at humans as recognizing patterns that the radar sees. And so every radar sensor, it kind of has its own tendencies in terms of spitting off, spurious, noisy detections. And so the machine learning is exceptional at identifying that over time. So if we label it enough, it starts to just pick up on it. And so it's very, very accurate at classifying this wake. And you'll see that there's a ton of wake and noise on the far right side of the radar screen here. And the reason it's really important that we don't tune the radar so that that's not there is because then that mutes our radar settings for the objects that we do care about, that may be very small, not very reflective, right?
It's like if you over or under adjust your C clutter, you may miss something or your gain.
Yes.
So yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And in a human operated situation with the radar, a lot of times you go, okay, I know there's a boat out there because I have an AIS transmission, but AIS only updates its position every now and then. So I'm going to tune my radar until I see it, right? And so you kind of have a known reference point. And what's really hard about the unmanned systems are that there's no source of truth on that boat to use their eyes to say, I know that there's something else out here and I'm going to tune the radar based on that, right? We
Well,
kind of have
and
to tune it generally all the time.
yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is with the AIS data, and this goes into your Apollo core too, is that with the AIS data is that what I found when I'm out there on the ocean is that the tankers sometimes turn it off. They become ghosts. You don't have that. You don't always have that data coming on. Cause I saw a tanker that was out there middle of the night. I picked it up on my watch and it was like popped in, popped out with the AIS. And I was like, what is going on? It was really, I mean, it was the first time I experienced that, but I talked to the people and they're like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. They turn it off. They might just, transmit if they see you nearby, but a lot of times they turn it off. So it was just interesting to me that you're not always you can't rely on that then,
Yeah.
it's being
I
a
do
data
think
point.
I do think in general, like a challenge that I see is that I do think people tend to trust AIS more than they should, without recognizing, a smaller vessel. So like a smaller commercial vessel that is required to have AIS, it may only be a Class B AIS, which means they may only ping every 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very, 2 minutes is if you're going 10 knots, right, that's a huge difference in location. And at
Yeah.
best, AIS is only, it's a very infrequent system, right? Even at the best situations.
Yeah. And then not all boats, you can have a vessel that's actually the receiving, but they don't have a transmit. So they don't have they don't have a transceiver. So they just have a transmit or they just have a receiver. So like my boat just has a receiver. I can just receive that information, but I'm not
Yep,
transmitting. My boat's too old
exactly.
currently.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this image that we're looking at here, that we see that Proteus Core is running on, there's probably a dozen boats if we were to count them all. None of them are transmitting AIS. This is very typical of a coastal U.S. coastal area. I would say that in Europe there's more AIS transmission on just like recreational boats. I would say that in the US, we tend to equip boats with radar before AIS transceivers. And in Europe, it's the opposite. They tend to have AIS before they have radar. I'm not sure why. Now, radar is better for tracking, a boat, right? For precise location, for collision avoidance, it is a better tool for that. And we can kind of dig into that. So ultimately, what we're trying to do with radar is track vessels over time. So, how long have we seen it for and where is it going? And we want to project its future location based off of its historical movement. So we know if there's a collision course that's possible. Maybe for a defense application, we're doing an intelligence and security mission, and we want to see everything around us and what it's been doing. Maybe there's some suspicious activity or some interesting movements. And then broadly, we just want to avoid collisions. So we want to know where these boats are heading, how fast they're going, all those types of things. So I can kind of see this breadcrumb trail off of every object here that we've tracked. Now, this is a capability that because we've classified these as boats, we know to expect something from that detection. And that is that doesn't sound like a big differentiator, but from a deeply technical perspective, it's a huge differentiator because ARPA treats all radar detections as the same. All right, ARPA is automatic radar plotting aid. It's the existing legacy radar tracking kind of capability. It has no context. And when we think about what AI is, it is making a machine more like a human in terms of its ability to think. And that a big part of that is context, absorbing information that's kind of outside of the kind of limited information set the computer has access to. And so AI can have a little bit of context. It's nowhere near the capability of a human brain, but it can have context in that it knows the classification of these objects. So it knows what to expect from them, in a more intelligent way than it has in the past. And so this makes our system highly reliable, highly precise, extremely durable. It allows us to persistently track every object that the radar sees. It really unlocks this future set of capability from a radar. And as you can see here, folks, if you're not interested or if you haven't experienced a radar, this is not a display you can get your radar to do without our technology.
No,
and
it's
so
not.
This is a very unique capability.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I took on my own, not a part of my captain's training. I took a 7-week additional radar class. I have to tell you, it was painful, but I learned a lot, and I appreciate it. Really, everything that you guys do, especially after learning, and it's just touching the surface. Radar, understanding radar data from a human perspective is very complex, and I don't think people give it enough credit. It's actually, like you said, you have an expert that you have taking all of this data and saying and confirming the information that they're seeing because they've seen that image enough. But from most people, you're looking at this data and you're going, if you don't say you're in a fog or anything and you kind of lose track, or maybe you get turned around and you're looking at your screen, you don't always know what that is. without that additional layer. You really don't. I mean, it becomes, you have to augment it with something, either human intelligence or a chart or something else that you're looking at or you are aware of. Binoculars, for
Yep.
instance.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I tell people all the time that human biology is we're quick to dismiss it, but you can see things with uncanny precision with your own eyes, just because of, evolution over the years. We have these very capable sensors in our heads, and that's how we kind of expect, mechanical sensors to be. And that's just not how they work, right? They see the world in a totally different way, in a much simpler, much more, kind of binary way. And so what AI allows us to do is kind of bridge the gap between computers and humans and how they communicate and deal with one another. And that is the layer that we're adding here. There's still a lot of human interpretation that has to happen, even in an unmanned application. So this is not removing the need for qualified mariners. I think there's more of a need than that, realistically, than there ever has been. Because for unmanned systems, what we see is you still have to have people to deploy the vessel. You now have to have people that understand how to control the vessel and how to interact with the autonomy system when they're not controlling it. Those people have to be experienced with the water, because you still have to understand things like sea state and weather and all the things we deal with. And now it's basically driving a remote control boat. So there's that. And again, unmanned vessels will just extend humans' reach. There's going to be many situations where an unmanned vessel can't accomplish the task that's required without a human in or on board or in that situation. And so there's and then into the future, like I've said, with recreational boats, we want to be in control of our boat. But it would be great for there to be some capability for your boat to not hit stuff when it knows there's an object around it, and to get you back home. If you become incapacitated, you have a little too much to drink, whatever the situation is. If my boat can take me home safely and I can trust it, that's a big benefit.
Well, we're just going to think about it being injured at sea. We're not going to condone the other.
That's right. We don't drink while we're on the water. That's for sure.
At least not till we get to port, right?
Yeah, that's right.
There's sundowners right at port.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. That was really cool. So I know we're kind of running, long on time. Do you have time for the lightning round? It's super fun.
Sure.
Okay, we'll try to get through it real. Yeah. So I call this the lightning round, but really I call it the buoy run, because it's really fun to talk about, like the buoy run. So, and in our scenario here, we're going to talk about, just kind of real quickly, kind of off the top of your head, think about these things. So the scenario is you're in a thick fog. The radar sees a blip. The camera sees nothing. Who wins, the classification? Is it the radar? Is it the camera? But you've got you. So if you have a battle going on between Apollo Core and Proteus, which one is it?
Fog is radar every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fog almost doesn't affect the radar screen. Only in rain will you see any degradation in radar performance. So yeah, going with the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So, assuming you have the OEM available again at some point in the future, you're a super yacht captain who wants to buy the full suite. I would like to be the super yacht captain, but it's not me. Who wants the full suite and decides they don't need to look out the window anymore. They can look at their MFD. So what's the one thing that they can't see with the human eye that they can't see that the human eye still can see? So with your system or system.
That's a great question. Well, there's on a big boat especially, you're going to have blind spots for any sensors, right? So I think anything that can appear very close to the boat is going to be tough. So a whale would be a big concern. There's not going to be a good sensor for that. Even with like a forward scan sonar, right? You could still have a whale strike. And on a super yacht, you could have an Argos sonar from Far Sounder. They make a forward-facing sonar that shoots out the bow of the boat. You can have an amazing sensor stack. So I would say anything that can appear close to the boat or move really quickly. So personal watercraft are still going to be a concern. Now, a lot of these things will be picked up by these sensors, but it's always a possibility that we deal with things in terms of how close to 100% can we get. Nothing will ever be at 100%, right? It's always the old engineering problem of always approaching the limit, never actually reaching it, right? So I think the reality of that situation is that you still need to be as in the loop as you can, especially when there's people on these boats. Now, in an unmanned boat, it's a little different because there's not humans at risk. So we can be a little more aggressive with how we interact. But I would say that those are going to be the big things. Some debris is going to be very hard to detect, especially in sea state. So you mentioned a floating container. That's a huge challenge. On a calm day, a radar would likely see it. On a choppy day, a radar probably wouldn't. the camera might still stand a chance, but depending on what kind of camera you have and how high it is off the water, you might not be able to see things that are close to the boat. So that object could be missed easily.
Yes, especially in sea state, and depending on the wave, so the wave pattern, how many seconds they are apart, you may miss it. So yeah, so that's good. I didn't really think about that being close to the boat, and that's a
Yeah.
really good point. Yeah.
The higher
So
up your sensors are, the harder it is to see next to the boat.
yeah, yeah. Okay, you mentioned you started in IoT, which I find very fascinating on a very different subject level with race cars. And you were looking at sensors. Do you foresee ever having a really truly integrated boat? I come from IT background, so I keep saying I want the dashboard. I want to come in the morning and sip my coffee as the captain and be like, what do the overnight logs say? What do I need to worry about? Do I need to change the oil soon? Do I need to schedule a tune-up? Do I need to check my belts, my coolant? Like, what is my engine? Like, all of the things on the boat. Like, what's my water level? What's everything? I just want that, single pane of glass. Is that even possible?
Yeah, it is for sure. And we have partners that do that because in the unmanned space, you have to have everything instrumented because there's no humans to maintain the boat. So there's, yes, absolutely. I think that is the hardest part of unmanning a vessel. And I also think it's even harder when you put a human in the loop because now you don't just have to communicate with machines, you have to communicate with people and machines, which is another variable. So I do think it's tough. One of the companies that uses our software is called Seaward Automation, and they make a command platform that does some automation like that, where they will instrument stuff in your engine room and give you warning lights when you need to change the oil and things like that that are somewhat uncommon on bigger boats. They kind of automate these processes. So yeah, there's a lot of people that are moving towards that capability, but I would say that look at the unmanned space for that to happen first.
I'm writing that down. Seaward automation, because
Yeah,
that's my
Seaward.
dream.
Yep, SEAWARD. And you can buy their command platform today, and it leverages Proteus Core for object detection and collision avoidance capabilities. But it also does, like, if you want to instrument, IoT stuff on your margarita machine, you can fire up a remote margarita or what, it can do almost anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I really think, like I said, having that look of your boat, and even if you're not on your boat all the time, having that insight as to what's happening, as opposed to, because I have to always wander down, check the lines, do all these things. It'd be nice if my boat was like, smart and said, hey, by the way, I seem to be a little bit looser on the right side. You might want to come tie me up better. I'm banging around the dock a little.
Yeah. There's a future where, those types of things are possible. For sure.
Yeah. So that's really fun. I'm so happy to think about that. So, okay, we move forward. Last question is, we move forward to, 6 years in the future. Are we still going to have 2D views of all this? Are we going to start seeing 3D views? Are we going to have, goggles that we can have on, as a captain? We can just look through our goggles and be like, oh, okay, I see everything. It's all integrated. Where do you see 6 years from now, 6 years down the road?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I feel like VR and AR has not had the uptake in just like general consumer industries that we would expect. So I think that as soon as you put someone on a boat, normalizing, like building that AR capability is very expensive. So I do not think in 6 years that will be normal. I think there's a cost barrier there that just will prevent it from being possible. Now, 3D augmented reality style displays on a plotter, I do think will become more prominent. I do think we've already built a model like that just using gaming technology. I mean, Qt is a software application for building frameworks like that. Some video gamers can easily throw that kind of world map together, right? The limitation is the compute power that's on boats. There's not enough of it right now on most boats to do any of that capability. So I do think in 6 years, you will have some emerging 3D capabilities. I think the lion's share of affordable entry-level boats will still have 2D traditional chart plotters. I think that's just the reality. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can start at least with the training of captains. It's a super exciting future. Thank you for appearing on the podcast, because I think what you guys are doing is just so fascinating. I'm like I fangirl whenever I look at your guys' products and what you're doing, because I just feel like it's so innovative and it's really where we need to think about in boating. And it's really interesting to me too that you guys are leaning more into the USV and the UUVs, because that really is where I feel like some of this technology is going. And as we know with anything that goes government, eventually kind of slides back into the private sector sometimes.
Yeah.
A lot of things are proprietary and not allowed, and they're only allowed for government for a reason, for our national security. But then when they become something that is not proprietary anymore, can move into the private sector, it's always going to be there and ahead. Well, not always, but sometimes it's going to be there and ahead. But it sounds like that's a hope and dream for me that may come true. So that's really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a future where unmanned vessels can accomplish things that are dangerous and difficult, and we don't want to put people in harm's way for it. And I think technologies like ours can make boating more accessible and enjoyable for the average person that wants to be on the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate it. I know we went a little long today, but you let me geek out a little, so I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to another episode of the AI Captain's Log. You can find me on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, and Spotify. And if you find me on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe. Thanks so much, and happy boating.